Welcome. My name is Peter Strong. I'm a professional mindfulness-based therapist based in Boulder, Colorado, and I offer online therapy via Skype for the treatment of anxiety disorders, and particularly for driving anxiety, which is extremely common. So if you'd like online help to overcome fear of driving on the highway, then please contact me and let's schedule a Skype therapy session. Typically, it takes about 3 or 4 sessions with me to learn how to apply mindfulness-based exposure therapy methods for overcoming your fear of driving on highways or roads or any other form of driving anxiety. The key is to set up a series of exposure challenges. I think that is fairly self-evident. You have to face your fears. However, exposure therapy by itself is not sufficient. Just facing your fears and trying to get through them is not an adequate approach to overcoming fear of highway driving. You must do training as well before you do each of your exposure challenges. So it's taking this strategic approach. You train before you do the challenge. You train until you neutralize any anxiety before you ever get on the motorway. Then you do your challenge and you process any anxiety that arises after the challenge, and you train with that anxiety, teaching it to resolve itself. So in mindfulness, we understand that it's not you technically that is anxious, it is the emotion itself, a conditioned habitual reaction that gets triggered in you. That is the anxiety, that is what the anxiety actually is. And it starts to become an automatic habit, so that every time you approach the freeway, that triggers that habitual anxiety reaction. So habits thrive on the absence of consciousness. They operate unconsciously. And that is the real problem. We start becoming run by these emotional habits. And in mindfulness exposure therapy, we work on changing these habits so that they do not run your life. We do this, surprisingly, for many, we do this by actually learning to meditate on the anxiety itself. So this is what I would train you in how to approach your anxiety. You play through the challenge that you're about to do in the mind. You look for the anxiety reactions that get triggered, and then at that moment you stop and change your relationship to that anxiety, and you turn it into an object. So this is the first most important step. You look at the anxiety as an object, or as being like a small child, or a small animal, or a pet, or any other object that feels right for you. You then change your relationship to that object, and you become the observer of that object. Instead of becoming swallowed up by the anxiety, you now become the observer of that anxiety. And that's a very different relationship. When you train in being the observer, you will train yourself out of the tendency to react, to become overwhelmed by the anxiety to identify with the anxiety. You see it as an object. It's not you, it's an object in your awareness. That's the first most important step. And the second step in overcoming any form of driving anxiety or highway phobia or fear of driving over bridges, whatever it is affecting you, the second most important step is developing a compassionate relationship with that anxiety. So when you can see it as being like a small child, it becomes fairly easy for most people to start to change their relationship from one of reactivity and fear, which simply feeds the anxiety, to one of compassion and friendliness. And that actually frees you even more from the anxiety itself. So the more that you can develop friendliness towards your anxiety, the freer you become. So that's a very important process. The third thing we do in our training, in our mindfulness-based exposure therapy training, is to look at the imagery of the emotion. So anxiety, like any emotion, has imagery. That's what gets triggered in the mind. And that imagery is what creates the anxiety. So typically with intense emotions like anxiety or a panic attack, the emotion is very large, it's very close, and also usually very high in your mind's eye, the way you see it in your imagination. So those features of being very large, very close, and very high are actually what causes the anxiety. Now, when you have established a non-reactive, mindful relationship with your anxiety, you can begin to investigate this imagery, and you can then start to change it. And you change the imagery into a form that does not produce anxiety. So, for example, we make the imagery of the emotion of anxiety many times smaller. We shrink it in size. We move it further away. That's a very important step, and it also helps develop that objective relationship of you as the observer. If you move it slightly further away, it's easier to see yourself as the observer. And we also move its position from being high in your psychological visual field to being lower. So classically, we would put the emotion on the ground. In the case of driving in a car, what often works quite well for many people, something you can try yourself, is to place that anxiety on the passenger seat beside you. So you make it small, you move it, and it will now be at a lower level beside you rather than being at head level above you. When you change its size and you change its position, it cannot be overwhelming anymore. Literally, it is now not in a position to be overwhelming because it's small, it's further away, and it's at a lower level. And seeing it like a child helps sustain that relationship of compassion and friendliness as well. And that's important because that changes your imagery, how you see yourself. It makes you bigger. When we develop friendliness or love, we become bigger. When we develop fear or hatred, we become smaller. The imagery is very important here, and when you develop friendliness, you help change that imagery, making the anxiety smaller and yourself bigger. So that's another very important step in what I call mindfulness-based exposure therapy. This approach works extremely well. So I will teach you how to do these 3 steps during our sessions together via Skype. We can do them, first of all, at home before you do your challenges, and we can also do them in the car as well, and that's quite interesting. So there you would drive to the beginning of one of your challenges, and we can continue our Skype call using your mobile phone, and we can I can guide you through it. We can work with any anxiety that gets triggered by the sight of the freeway or other structure that causes your anxiety. So we can start to work with that, and we can train out of those habitual anxiety reactions. Then when you feel ready, you then would do the challenge, and I will stay with you via Skype, and we can put these methods into practice during the challenge. You can literally imagine moving the anxiety to the passenger seat if it arises during the challenge, and then we can meditate again after the challenge and review any fresh anxiety that was triggered, and we can help it resolve itself and heal by the same methods. And then after a short break, you can repeat that challenge again. So within a very short time, you will start to gain more and more confidence as you train out of these anxiety habitual reactions. That's all they are. Anxiety is a series of habitual reactions, and habits can be changed. They can be changed by consciousness, by mindfulness, by actually looking and seeing how they work, to see how the imagery works, and then to change that imagery in a way that leads to the resolution of that anxiety. So I will teach you how to do all this. All you have to do is contact me, and let's schedule some Skype therapy sessions. You'll see some big changes even after the first session. So please contact me if you would like to learn more about online mindfulness-based exposure therapy for overcoming fear of highways and freeways and driving in general. Thank you.